Good evening and welcome to the live stream of the podcast. Thank you for joining us on this Friday evening. This is a special episode that we have today. Tonight, we are joined by Mr. Khari Edwards, who is running to be our Brooklyn Borough President. We're going to talk to Mr. Edwards about the role of the Brooklyn Borough President. There's elections less than 8 weeks now, and we're going to talk to him about his experience growing up in Brooklyn, why he is running, and why we should vote for him. So let's bring on Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Brooklyn Borough President. We hear a lot about the Brooklyn Borough President. We see him at different events. We see him in news conferences, giving his thoughts on different topics that affect the community. But a lot of people are not really sure what the role of the Borough President is. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of this role?
Well, yes, and again, thank you for having me. The role of Borough President has changed over many, many years. Its creation started in 1892, and each area of New York had its own president, its own mayor, so to speak, and they kind of represented the needs of that particular borough to the mayor of the city. And so the role of borough president was really strong right up until 1989, where they kind of took the ability for them to vote on the city budget. In terms of one vote, the borough presidents currently have 1/5 of a vote, because what happened was Brooklyn was too big. And so they felt that there was too much representation, too much money going from Brooklyn to the city, or from the city to Brooklyn. So the role of borough president now really is an ambassador of Brooklyn. It's an advisory role to the mayor's office and city hall about the needs of the borough. They convene what they call these borough committees, which is made up of all the city council members, and then they meet to talk about what's the overall need of the borough. Like I said, the borough president gets 1/5 of the vote in city budget. So the roles that we've seen from Marty Markowitz being the ambassador, being the biggest cheerleader for Brooklyn, to Eric Adams, who kind of redefined it in itself. It's really like an undefined role, but what it does have, it has the ability to appoint 25 members to the community board per community board. So you have 25 times 18. They get an appointment to the the panel for educational policy, which is the PEP, and that person also helps shape the DOE's curriculum, so to speak, and then also has a vote on the city pension. They also can appoint folks to the Community Education Council, the CEC. And that's really the role that it plays. One of the things that we really know the borough president for, but most people don't talk about, is the ULUR process, the Unified Land Use Rezoning process. And so in that case as well, anything you want in terms of upzoning, downzoning, agreements for buildings coming in your community support, the borough president has a high recommendation in that, as well as the city council. But the biggest point is they also have a appointment on the the Public Commission Council, which also handles the votes for any type of ULURP or rezoning process.
Yeah, the zoning. Now, zoning, you touched on a very hot topic that I think has been affecting Brooklyn for a little bit over a decade now, right? And many different neighborhoods throughout Brooklyn have held different types of rallies, demonstrations, and marches on the different rezonings taking place, because a lot of Brooklyn residents are afraid of gentrification, and that is a big role that the borough president plays in deciding how land is used, and that's a lot of pressure, Mr. Edwards, and a lot of different points of views and all that, and so, taking into consideration everything that we spoke about, the role of the borough president, what motivated you to run for this position?
Well, so I've had 20 plus years of experience in public service. I tell the story all the time. I started out working for Assemblyman Nick Perry in 1999 as his community liaison, handling meetings. And something in that office changed my life and my perspective. One day I was in the office early for a meeting, and the assemblyman never let staff answer the phone who weren't prepared. And this particular day, the phone rang off the hook. It kept ringing. And I'm like, I got to answer this phone. And I answered the phone, which I wasn't supposed to. And on the other side was a constituent, Miss Owens. And she was a senior in the community, lived on Clarendon Road, came home, and kind of had shut off her lights. And she was panicking. She needed to speak to the assemblyman, and I started panicking. It was my first call. You always remember your first call. And I told her, I'll get the message to the assemblyman. And I hung up, and I was panicking. And I picked up the phone. I called Con Ed. And I told Con Ed, who I was and who I worked for and what was going on, and that we needed this thing fixed. And after 10 minutes of back and forth, Con Ed said to me, we're going to turn the lights back on. We're going to give her a payment plan. And I was like, wow, this is what good public service is supposed to be like. And so I spent my 20 years working for different elected officials, worked for congressperson, worked for a couple governors. And then all of that came to a head for me when I was the vice president of external affairs for Brookdale Hospital. And it was amazing to work in a hospital with union workers who had great pensions, great benefits, but were living in their cars or living in shelters because they couldn't afford to live in the borough that they worked in. And so it started to become a mission of looking at healthcare access, looking at housing access, looking at just not having the everyday Brooklynite have a voice. And I was just like, look, the hospital I represented had 1.3 million people as our catchment area. And for me, it was like, it's time really, rather than me continue to call the elected officials, be the elected official that receives the call, who understands what the work is, who's gone through answering the phone on many occasions. So, Brooklyn, it was a big jump into a big role, but I felt it was necessary because as much as we're different, we're really the same throughout the borough. So that was the genesis for me wanting to run for office.
Now, did you get in trouble for answering the phone calls since you weren't supposed to be answering the phone?
Well, you know how life works, right? If all of a sudden it works out, you didn't get in trouble. If it didn't work out, I would have gotten in trouble. But no, everything worked out for Ms. Owens. And again, it launched me into a different understanding of what public service means.
So what was that feeling like? You were able to solve the problem on that first phone call. And what are you feeling? Like that must have been a big sense of accomplishment at that point, in your life, right? This is your introduction to constituent work.
Yeah, it was a rush that I could never, ever explain, unless you get, it's kind of like, if you ever see a young person helping someone across the street, that feeling of gratitude, that feeling of excitement, and it made me thirsty for more. It made me want to help more people. And it was just part of really my life, My parents are immigrant parents. My dad is from Guyana. My mom is from Trinidad. Through Venezuela, because my grandmother was Venezuelan, so they migrated to Trinidad. And so they always taught me being selfless is the best part of being selfish. And so it was always something that I grew up always trying to put people first. And this was something to say, wow, you really got to see it in that moment. And it really just changed who I was. And it's really just been the way I've lived my life since.
You grew up in Crown Heights?
Yes, I grew up in Crown Heights.
What was that like?
Crown Heights was very unique. Brooklyn is diverse. And growing up in Crown Heights in the 70s and the 80s, it was diverse. We basically were a minority community for many years. And then a lot of my neighbors, Jewish neighbors, started to come back after years. And so the community started to diversify. I went to a private school that was a Caribbean school right around the corner. But if I walk out in my block now, from when I grew up, the entire community is changed, So we went from a high African American population when I was growing up to now a very, balanced African American, Caribbean American, and Jewish community. So it really taught you how to work with others. I was on a Zoom yesterday, and I was on a Jewish panel Zoom screening, and I am a Shabbos Gentile. And, so a friend of mine told me that. So all of the years that on a Friday evening when I'm turning off stoves or turning off air conditions, I never knew there was a name for that. And it was the coolest thing growing up in this community. And it was a lot of challenges too, because you can go to Nostrand Avenue, you could go to Franklin Avenue now, but as a kid, it was a very dangerous area. Your parents didn't want you to go over there. So as we see the community change and grow, I don't like using the word gentrify, but as we see the community change and grow, a lot of the different things from growing up are fading away, so to speak.
Yeah, is do you think that those things that are fading away, is it a good thing that they're fading away, or should we hold on to those things that are fading away? Like Brooklyn, and I think cities around the world in general tend to have different cycles and different changes. And sometimes the change is good. Sometimes we feel a sense of loss when we think about old school Brooklyn. Um, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm kind of in the middle of it, right? And it's kind of right down the middle because I was here back when, and a lot of us who grew up here were here back when. But even just seeing the Brooklyn that my parents lived through to I'm living through to now what my children's living through, it kind of just reimagines itself. It's not, I'm a historian. I love history, right? So I love to hold on to those things. But history has to be made by present and future events as well. So as I look at what has changed, I'm not sad. I'm excited for it. But I also like to maintain the fact that there is historical process here, and how do we maintain, the history of it? How do we teach ourselves that, I was born in Brooklyn Jewish Hospital that's now condominiums. And, because I was born there, I really didn't understand it, but now I do understand the historical facts of it. And when you pass by the building, and saying, I'm going to be the future borough president, and I was born in a building that's now condos, but I'm excited about the young people who are moving in, the way they're taking care of the community as well. So it's been fun, and I'm glad to say that I've seen the entire spectrum, so to speak, that not losing anything in the middle.
Now, do you have a favorite memory of growing up in Crown Heights, growing up in Brooklyn, of that experience of back when?
Yeah, my favorite memory is probably, people may think it's a little weird, but I really just remembered always walking. So growing up here, my parents made sure that I went to schools in the community. And so my favorite memory really was walking to the corner of Carroll and Brooklyn, and walking from the corner of Carroll and Brooklyn all the way down to the Brooklyn Children's Museum. Which is literally a linear shot. But I went to St. Mark's Day School. I went to St. Gregory's Catholic school, and it was always and I always remembered the little tunnel at the Brooklyn Children's Museum that's still there, right?
Still there, yes, it's still there.
So that's always been my memory of like being old enough to walk down there by myself or walk home. I was one of the latchkey kids, and walk home, and that was kind of like my little treat to myself. So yeah, that's that little tunnel. I would always just stand at the entrance and look at that tunnel and be like, "Oh, that's so cool," and walk home.
So I'd like to now kind of shift towards like some of the issues that affect the borough, and I'd like to, I guess, get a sense of what you think. What would you advocate for? And we kind of touched on it a little bit early on. And the development, there's a lot of development taking place in the borough. And there also seems to be a shortage of housing. And over the last couple of years, and maybe even decades, the cost of rent for those who rent has gone up significantly, where people are beginning to feel like they're getting priced out of the neighborhoods that they love living in. And some attribute that to gentrification, right? We can't talk about Brooklyn. We can't talk about the different neighborhoods. Sunset Park is a big hot topic. Whenever we talk Sunset Park, gentrification is something that's right there at the forefront of issues affecting the community. And gentrification, is this something that we should be concerned about? Is this something that we should try to stop, slow down, maybe change zoning regulations? What can we do to help our neighbors who are getting priced out of their apartments?
So this is my number one topic, right? And every alliteration as it pertains to housing affordability. Just to really clarify for your viewers, right? Gentrification is a nasty word, but the reality of it is right, that gentrification only happens because of pre-displacement. And so my team and I, I'm very, like I told you, the fact that I'm running is because I saw people who have jobs who live in shelters, and morally I could not deal with that. Like I couldn't deal with the fact that knowing a person would come home, would leave their car to shower at the job so that they are fresh for the new day. And so we have a huge displacement issue in Brooklyn. I'll stay with Brooklyn. So every day, every week, there's a young man on my team named Jake. Him and I sit down and we create policy thought processes, right? Because even though the borough president's office, they can introduce legislation. I'm sorry to say this. They can introduce legislation in partnership with city council members. So it'll be like, Councilman Rob introduces this legislation on behalf of Borough President Edwards. And so that's the way it works. We did a district by district breakdown of community AMIs, right, which is called the area median income. And that is, so there's a community AMI. The average income in Brooklyn is $34,000 a year. So you have the Park Slope guys that are high, you have the Brownsville, East New York, some parts that are low. So they equal out to $34,000 a year. I just did an op-ed in the Brooklyner where we basically broke down the community AMIs. So take some place like Sunset Park. The community AMI in Sunset Park, the average median income is 40%. Now, what does 40% means? That means it's anywhere between $18,000 and maybe $60,000 a year. Every building that has gone up in Sunset Park for, say, the last 8 years, these new developments are somewhere between 80 to 130% AMI. So if you just basically do the math, you would have to basically work double your AMI just to live in a community like Sunset Park. So that's starting to cause a displacement. Another example, and this is a piece of legislation that I want to introduce with the city council member, whoever will take up this one. Every new building that is city or state funded, I want to require that they have 3 or 4 bedrooms. Because the example that I give Rob is, I had a fire in my home. So you guys can see behind me, this is the home I grew up in. My parents bought this house in 1958, I believe. And my 86-year-old dad lives with me, my 3 children, and my wife. We had a fire. Do you know we could not find a place? Insurance couldn't even find a place for us all to stay together. So my dad had to stay with a friend. My children from a previous marriage, they had to stay with their mom. Like my wife and I had to stay. And imagine now we had insurance. So imagine what the average family who has 2 children, a wife, a husband, and a dog, if we're only building, 1 bedrooms or studios, where are we fitting those folks? And then the average 1 bedroom is now, let's say, you have to earn at least $79,000 a year. There are union workers who are still trying to make $15 an hour. And how are they now going to afford that? So one thing that I do want to propose as borough president, in conjunction with a lot of city council members, is that the federal government sets the AMI for New York, right? And that includes Westchester, that includes Upper East Side, it includes the richest parts of New York City, and then it's thrown into this mix. So the average AMI, it starts at close to 80%. But when it comes to city housing or housing is funded in support of the city, the mayor could set the AMI at the community AMI. The city council could work to set that building's AMI. So what we need to really do is push that. I told some supporters the other day, they're like, well, the borough president has a limited role. But if I know that somebody's building something in our community and it's not the AMI that's going to displace our folks, I'm willing to lay down and tie myself to the property. Because at some point, what's going to happen is that we're building all of these great places, but we can't fill them. The vacancy rate is high. After COVID, so many people moved away. Let's bring it down. I understand construction costs are high and all of these other things, but the reality of it is our human resource is our best resource. And right now, when you look at the amount of people in our homeless shelters, almost 50% of those are working class families. And so there's this disconnect. These aren't the homeless folks that have no job or need to help mental health help. These are folks who have jobs, who get pensions. And so we really have to find a balance. And Sunset Park, Bushwick, Coney Island, like these areas are really now having high displacement because folks are coming in and saying it's a nice community. It's got green stuff. Let's build up these things, what they call as of right, but they're pricing our folks out. And so there's got to be a distinguishing way between the government and doing those things. And you talk about vouchers, talk about the basis of it. And just real quickly, we did a breakdown of our homeless population. Do you realize that the city is almost paying $3,000 to $8,000 a month per homeless person? So you think the average market rent for a 2-bedroom is $3,000? Why we can't move the family out? And so there's a lot of stuff that government deals with. And again, there's a limited role that the borough president has, but what he does or she does have is a loud mouth and a lot of people behind him. And, like I said, I'm really ready to chain myself to buildings to say, listen, if we can't build for our folks, then it can't be done.
Yeah, and that sends a very strong message, right? That you're willing to put yourself in front of a building to advocate for families. That's very powerful, and I appreciate that. I also want to like the way you kind of simplified these numbers for us to understand. And we hear this a lot. It's a very big topic where there seems to be possibly a shortage of available shelters or homes or apartments or rentals that people don't have access to because they simply cannot afford it. And I also like the sound of that, what you said earlier before, Council Member Rob. That's actually maybe in another lifetime, but yeah, that actually sounded kind of cool. Another issue that also comes up a lot, and I speak about this a lot on the podcast because it affects us locally as a community, is also the relationship between the community and our local precincts. Mm-hmm. And now more so with a lot of the things that we see on the news, on TV, on social media, every person has a cell phone and they record sometimes the police mistreating people, sometimes escalating situations that could have been easily de-escalated. And there is a rift in that relationship where there's a big mistrust, right? I hear people say they don't feel safe when they see a patrol car roll down the street or behind them when they're driving or at a red light, stopping at a red light. And because of all this, there is this movement that all across the country we hear, right? Like this defund the police movement. Mm-hmm. What comes to mind when you hear defund the police?
I mean, what came to my mind initially was something that I didn't think made sense. But that was my ignorance and not really getting to the deeper understanding of it. And so as a candidate, my position about defunding the police is the essence of, I'm not trying to take police officers off the street. At the hospital that I worked at, the first year I got there were 255 gunshot victims in a year. There is a need for police officers, but this is a two-pronged conversation, right? The first part about our police officers, and this is something that I'm going to again put legislation into and hope that this thing gets passed, is that we should require that our police officers coming out of the academy are certified in certain areas. One, they should have, cultural competency certification, not just the test, full certification. They should have customer service. Like Disney does a lot of great stuff. They should have Disney certification. And the biggest one is implicit bias certification, because you find a lot of most of our officers do not live in our community. And when they come into this community, whether they are a white person from Long Island who has never experienced a black person with a boombox on the corner with his pants sagging, or never seeing a husband and wife, a Latinx husband and wife having an aggressive argument that doesn't turn violent. They don't realize how cultures work. And we send them out there with the expectation that they're going to be able to do the right thing. And it's shown too often that, you have natural people who are biased, but you do not create an atmosphere. One of a candidate who's running in the 40th district, we were together at a youth event, and he's a police officer, and he said he was on the force only a year, and he was with a cop who was on the force for 18 years, who was never on a train. And so he said, at that moment, I realized this cop's on the train, never realizing what the cultural understanding of this community is. So what I would really like to see is that certification process done and have them be recertified every 5 years. And I'm just giving the human being the benefit of a doubt that they'll do the right thing and that they're just not implicitly racist or biased. And then in that respect, now to defund the police department gets money for new cruisers. They have tanks. You see, they have robot dogs now. That money's wasted. That money's wasted. And where's that money? Where should that money be? That money should be keeping after school programs open. That money should be in terms of training and hiring mental health experts to maybe ride in the cars with these individuals. There's so much money. I could imagine what it costs per robot dog, even though they did away with it. But these are the things that we see. You and I don't get cars every 3 years. They're new cruiser cars every 3 years. And so when you really delve into the defund the police, it's really defunding the unnecessary overspending and the militarization of these officers. These officers, obviously, they're pension jobs. They're trying to do the right thing, most of them. That's fine. But they don't need these super Iron Man, Avenger type of apparatus to deal with people. They really need customer service and things like that. And then also, too, that money should be used to empowering communities. It should be used for job creation programs, because most of the communities that we have high crime, we notice there's low economic status in there. There's no place to eat. There's no grocery stores, like so much stuff, and people are angry. And that's from Sunset Park to Brownsville to Coney Island. So I do understand, and I agree with the defund the police, but I do think that it's necessary that we speak a little more about it, because we get into these phrases, and then these phrases create a life of their own, and then people get caught up in it. But yeah, that's so I am in agreement with defunding that aspect of the police department.
Yeah, and if we dissect and look at some of the numbers, right? I remember in the previous budget, NYPD was getting something around $6 billion a year, and that is like way more, astronomically more than, for example, schools, hospitals, mental health institutions get combined. And something that COVID exposed was the state of our public hospitals, right? Where doctors and nurses didn't have the right equipment, didn't have the right PPE, were lacking in PPE because of funding, while the NYPD's budget is beyond what these fundamental institutions need. So
if you don't mind, I'll jump in at that point for a second. So I worked at a hospital in East Brooklyn, the highest comorbidities, highest diabetes, HIV, whatever you imagine about it. We were losing people at an alarming rate during COVID. CNN reached out to me, because I was the vice president of external affairs. CNN reached out to me and wanted to understand what was going on. And I let them in the hospital. And the reason why I let them in the hospital is because the people that I loved and worked with were wearing trash bags to protect themselves. They didn't have PPE. We didn't have ventilators. We didn't even have the proper hospital beds. You look at one patient, you'd be like, I'll be right back. You turn around, that patient was gone. And like you said, the NYPD had money, and not to say we were even prepared, but our hospitals, our Lutheran Hospital in Sunset Park, Even though NYU has them now, so you guys are a little better in that respect. But they're so underfunded. And what was even more disturbing, though, Rob, that even NYPD officers didn't have face shields and didn't have masks. And these were officers dealing with stuff every day. So think about, where was that money going? And when they defunded the police this last cycle, what they did is they took away from the civilian side of it, the medical examiners, the overtime for people who had to do that. And I'm hearing from a couple of my city council friends that money has been allocated, but has not been dispersed to the areas that they were supposed to do. So, I mean, really, we have to really stay on top of our government. But you're right, that money would have saved so many lives, so many hospitals, would have given us a fighting chance, but the money wasn't there.
Yeah. And we have actually a comment that just came in from YouTube, from Church Road 11220. He basically is saying, well said, on your comment on defunding the police. Now, another issue is immigrant rights.
Mhm.
We have a high population of immigrant workers who sustain our city, who are now, after COVID, considered essential workers, who keep our city moving. Is there anything in your plan to advocate for these families who contribute so much to the fabric of our borough?
Yeah, I mean, and yes, and my parents were those folks while they were waiting for their citizenship. The most disgusting thing that I heard during the Trump administration was this thing called public charge. So, a lot of our public hospitals, and many hospitals, once you come to the emergency room, you're supposed to be seen. If there's a need for support through any type of service, Donald Trump, that son of a gun, said, you know what, we are not going to support anybody who's taking money from our communities as part of the public charge. But yet, Donald Trump, you don't realize, or you didn't realize, that our construction workers, right? 32 BJ is made up of many immigrants. There's so many immigrants in healthcare who are paying their taxes, who are becoming real fabrics of our community. And so for me, our immigrant population should be able to vote as they're waiting for their citizenship. If you're going to tell me to pay taxes and I'm working, then I should be able to choose the people who are there. Again, that rhetoric of immigrant hate was, in Sunset Park, there was ICE trying to pick folks up at the heart of our immigration issue. We were getting calls from hospitals, be wary, because they're showing up to hospitals. Disgusting. And so then when you start to look at it, anything that I can do from the borough president's office to support our immigrant families, Nick Perry, to his credit, he was a state elected official. He had an immigration person helping in his office. He had somebody designated to help people with their immigration issues. I'm going to do that in Borough Hall, because for us, it's a reality of, one, folks are scared to speak up. They're not getting the respect that they do for being part of the fabric. And you and I are products of that. We are products of real immigrant families. So I really am supporting, the voting right for immigrants, even while they're awaiting citizenship, or if they don't have citizenship, because the reality of it is we're on their back. We use them to step higher. And why can't they also have a say in who they're electing in office? So that's one of the things that I'm really supporting once I get in office.
And another important role that you have is the relationship between the borough president's office and our community boards.
Yes.
Throughout the borough. And one question that came up from one of our viewers previously was term limits for people on the community board, right? There are community board members that have been there for over 20 something years in some cases.
Right.
Do you think it's time that we implement term limits for people who serve on the community board?
Yes, and my answer is yes, because if we take congressional folks, right? Congressional folks run every 2 years. but they could stay there for however long. But if you speak to any elected official, by the time they find out where all the bodies are buried, or how to really pass a bill, or how to really negotiate, they need to be in there for 8 to 10 years. Community boards are different, right? They are voluntary positions who at some point, as the communities change, you don't have to learn the process, or you don't have to continue to learn the process, at least under what my administration will do. One thing Marty Markowitz had that Eric Adams got rid of was the directive community boards, which was the liaison to help prepare new community board members for their role. The other side of it too is the training aspect. I want to make sure that I can help train folks into ULURP, folks into liquor license understandings, into whatever the departments are within the community board purview. I want to make sure that I give them technical assistance. So I would like to see. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with. I think it's 2 years now. I think it should be 4-year terms based off of what the city and borough presidents, if you want to do it that way. But I understand 2-year terms. What I also want to do in terms of diversifying our community boards and strengthening the community boards to say that, you know what, Rob brought me on his show, so I'm going to put him on the community board because that's my guy. I want to do away with that. What I want to say is, look, I've went through 150 screening process, right? Everything from debates on. I want to take that same principle. And if Rob applies to be the community board member for Community Board 7, I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to get a business leader, some residents, church leader, teachers, and say, I need you guys to screen Rob. And what Rob, and look at what Rob's agenda is. How do you feel? Is he going to answer the right questions? And then if you say to me as a screening committee, this is our guy, then he's going to get appointed to me by the borough president. I think all too often it's like, this person has been part of the community. That's true, and then there's something else I want to do for all of those family members that work late or don't have time to come to the community boards. Virtual has showed us a great deal of stuff, but I want to make sure that I market and that I send surveys out and that I keep people interested, because again, what happens is when we find out a new building's coming up and then they say those people voted on it, but they never spoke to us. I want to eliminate that as well. I want to kind of create a very robust community board process. And the young guy I was talking about, Jake, he made me laugh one day because he's like, we could kind of even turn some of the community boards into like almost jury duty and pay them for service, which I'm sure people will love, but the budget would kill me. But I also don't want to eliminate those folks that have been there for 20 years. And I would like to create an emeritus board that will be able to serve as an advisory role of this is how we used to do it. And so give them understanding. And I like to expand it for 16 to over, so that our young people can also get a chance to understand how that process works. Not necessarily a full board, but to just get a couple young people, because again, it's a voluntary position.
Yeah, I like what you said, right, with regards to community board members who have been there a long time. If there's term limits, they don't necessarily have to go away. Like they could also serve on committees, right? A lot of community boards have different committees, and it would be important. And I think they shouldn't go away after the term limit is over. Like community boards can rely on their experience, having served a term already there once before. They can help and advise, like you said, or serve on committees, and use that experience to help new members that might be on. Another thing that has come up is it seems like community boards are completely off during the summer. And I think it basically just equates to 2 meetings, but that's like 90 days. Right. And a lot of things happen in the summertime as well. And I understand that it is a position that people volunteer for, but could there be a restructure where there isn't such a wide gap of 90 days in the summertime, and maybe somehow adjust that so that things don't get lost during those 2 months that they're off?
Yeah, and I believe in giving credit where credit is due. So to all of your listeners, This was something that Rob brought up to me earlier, and I think it's an amazing idea. So I want to give you credit for that, because you're absolutely right. When you talk about community board issues, you talk about everything from block parties to some of our biggest holidays in July 4th. And what you tend to understand, even from a political standpoint, that's when people are mostly out, and that's when people are mostly dealing with things. And so this wasn't something that I originally thought about. So Rob, I'm going to steal your idea. I do think that we probably should take a quicker break in terms of taking off December, and allowing even a virtual or a tele call. I guess tele is a call, right? Or a call that we can convene around certain issues that are specific to whatever the community needs at that time. Because obviously ULURP processes won't be going through the summer, and there's a lot of other things that won't, but there are issues around everything from resiliency projects to, somebody's opening a new establishment. So I do think that what we should do is look at what are those particular issue points, have those committee members call in if they're taking a vacation or show up, and so that we can keep the business going, because that is a great idea. And one thing I just like to go back to about the community boards, I'm going to propose that, in 1975, the community boards lost their ability to vote on development projects. So right now they have only an advisory position. I'm going, because community is important and you guys live where you understand things are going, that I'm going to really push to get that charter mandate taken back, so that developers have to be able to really present to community boards ahead of time, so that we're not fighting them at the last step.
Yeah, I appreciate that you're going to take that into consideration. I cannot take credit for that point. That was actually one of our Facebook viewers, Mr. Tony Giordano, and we sent Mr. Tony Giordano a big hello. Thank you so much for throwing that comment and question out there. So and a big hello to the entire Giordano family. They are a very big asset to the Sunset Park community. So
and
my
it's
regards to them.
And they are the catalyst for me being on your show too. So the same respect and shout out to them. They've been great. I've been learning so much from them, and I thank them for their time and effort as well in my candidacy.
So we have a question also from coming in from Facebook, and this is from Giselle Jimenez, and she is suggesting possibly the chance of having interns. And they can provide, so this will provide exposure to the community board for young people as well, and young students. Is that something that could also come into play?
Yes, and so we at Borough Hall are going to be very intern heavy. Remember, there are 18 community boards, and each one of those community boards they have roles and responsibilities that what I want to do is to make sure that we have interns and young people learning the process throughout. My mother exposed me to the political world haphazardly, just by mistake. Come with me, you're my date today, your dad can't make it. And I learned so much. I met so many people, and there's so many young people who, from an educational standpoint, just want to learn. I did a career day this morning with some 7th graders, and I was running for office, and normally I'm the vice president of the hospital, and it's so boring, right? But I'm telling you about I'm running for office now, and I got more questions about, did I take political science, and how was it debating? And you like, wow, so some of our young people really want to be civically engaged and don't know how to. What again, I'm going to do for each community board is make sure that we have interns working to understand, and hopefully they get credit from their school. But if they want this opportunity, the Office of Borough President is not there to stop them from that. And hopefully if summer youth employment stays the way it is, then we can also hire some of these young people to work in those areas.
And now, Mr. Edwards, the $1 million question, right? There are a lot of folks running for this position. It's a very crowded race, if you will. It's been described that way by the different news outlets. Why should we vote for Khari Edwards to be our next borough president?
Well, I'm one of you. And I know every elected official started out being one of you and lost their way around, lost their self around the way. I'm not an elected official. I have really cut my teeth in learning how to support my community. The reason how I got to Nick Perry's office is because I started a youth basketball tournament because there were too many kids in my community who didn't know how to play basketball, and the kids just needed something to do. And I am actually the only candidate with borough-wide experience. The two governors that I spoke about working for, I was the Brooklyn regional rep for Governor Elliott Spitzer and David Patterson. And I worked in Sunset Park. I worked in Coney Island. I worked in, Brownsville, and I started to get exposed to the communities to understand what the issues are. I also handled health policy for the New York State Democratic Conference as it pertained to healthcare. So I'm familiar with Lutheran Hospital, Maimonides Hospital, and Interfaith Hospital because if we didn't continue to protect those hospitals, healthcare would have been lost. So the reason why, I know I'm the better candidate is because I've had the experience of being on the ground in the weeds, but I also have the knowledge and know-how of how government works. And, in this particular day and age, you need someone to really put those two pieces together and really just be a normal guy and really just be able to be approachable and say, hey, look, I got this thing, and can you think about it? And the folks that I'm running against, I'm in the top 4 in candidates, but the folks that I'm running against, they're career politicians. I felt that they've had 8 years to change things, and I wouldn't have jumped into this race if I felt that, the folks that I'm running against really had the full community's best interests at heart. You give someone 8 years, I have to prove myself. My expectation is if I don't do what I'm supposed to do in my first term, then you don't reelect me. But that's not, so that's why I'm the best candidate in that respect. And it feels funny being a little cocky about it, but I realize in this role, my wife says you have to kind of be a little more, projective, but I care about people, and I care about people in a way that I don't think anyone could match. And, whether, again, it was Miss Owens or somebody just crossing the street, it's important that we got, my 3 things. We have to make sure we have a healthy community. We have to make sure that we have roofs over our head. And where there's poverty, we have to solve it. Sunset Park, Brownsville, East New York, parts of Canarsie, Coney Island, and parts of Bensonhurst, like those are communities who are suffering, who are going through AMIs and displacement. And I don't see anybody in the race speaking to their issues other than just wanting to run. So for me, that's the reason why I'm running.
Mr. Edwards, thank you so much for sharing some time this evening with us. It was great to learn more about you. I had a great time learning about your stance on the different issues that affect our borough. And if people want to learn more about your campaign, is there a website or social media? Where can we follow to learn more about your campaign and what you plan to work on?
Yes. So if you want to learn more about my campaign, it's www.khariedwards.com. So it's really just putting 3 W's in front of my first and last name. My social media is Khari O. Edwards. My middle name is Overton. It's a family middle name. So it's Khari O. Edwards. And that's my Instagram and my Twitter and my Facebook. If you guys log on tonight to my Instagram, you'll see, one of my favorite songs is Michael Jackson, Jackson 5, Blame It on the Boogie. And so you'll see my wife posted a picture of me dancing. Not a great dancer, but I tried. So again, www.khariedwards.com, and my social media handles is Khari O. Edwards.
Okay. And we'll post those links in the show notes. Mr. Edwards, thank you very much for being here. We would definitely love to catch up with you as we get closer to the election. It's only a few weeks away. And if you are fortunate enough to be our next borough president, I'd love to have you back and talk about what it's like to be on the job officially. And so once again, thank you so much for being here.
Listen, so Once I win, it'll be a monthly show with you because, again, Sunset Park is an important community to me and just to understanding our minority community. So I'm giving you my promise that once a month we'll do this because, understanding the breadth and relationship and how you educate your community is very important to me. So without question, I'll be back before and after I win.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. You heard it here first. Mr. Edwards, when he becomes our borough president, is going to meet with us once a month, and I think that would be a great way to check in and see how things are going and to listen to the community. Our viewers are not shy at all. They love to express what they're feeling and what they're thinking. I want to thank you all for being here tonight and sharing this evening with us. We will be back next week with another great guest. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.